Hey everyone! This video is part 2 in Carlos's series on veganism and the left. He has his own channel now and he's raising money, so I wanted to upload this last video of his to help him promote it. So check out the links to his channel and Ko-fi in the description and send him a few bucks so he can survive.
Hi everyone, I'm here again on Chris' channel, and as he just mentioned, this video is a part 2 of the video about veganism. So if you haven't checked that one yet, I recommend watching it first, or else you'll be lost and you'll don't understand many things that I'm talking about here. So in the first video, I started by firstly defining what veganism is, so you know what I'm referring to, what I'm talking about exactly. Then I mentioned how it relates to politics, especially leftist politics, and how it relates to environmentalism, human rights, and then started talking about relevant things that came to the top of my head. That means there's stuff I certainly missed in the first video, stuff that's important and I didn't talk about, because there's just so much to talk about when it comes to veganism, when it comes to the intersections between veganism and other movements, veganism and the left and the right. There's so much stuff. So that's why this is a part 2 to elaborate on more things and bring up new points that were initially missed. So if you've watched the first video, you know that veganism is about not harming animals. It's not about loving animals. It's about respecting their basic dignity and fighting for their rights, for their liberation. You don't need to be like an animal lover to have a deep emotional connection with animals, or be part of a club of people who love cows, who love pigs because they're cute and adorable. No, it's not necessarily that. Well, there are many people around who say they love animals, they're huge animal lovers, and they're not vegan. So we should try to appeal to them, asking them, well, if you love animals, then the most logical thing to do would be to go vegan, right? It's the most consistent. And then there are these cute videos of animals who are typically exploited for food, like cows and pigs. And these videos being shared on the internet, they can be the last straw for people to consider veganism. They might be eating bacon, they see a video of a cute pig, oh my god, look at this pig. Yes, but you don't have to love someone in order not to harm them. There are also people I don't love. And guess what? I'm not punching these people in the face for fun. I don't love them, but I respect them. I leave them alone. So if you're like, why should I be vegan? I don't even love animals. Okay, but you don't even have to like animals to be vegan. You don't have a free pass to not be vegan just because you say you don't love animals. Another thing is that many people who not only aren't vegan, but also try to argue against veganism and make all sort of excuses to not go vegan, they already agree with the message of veganism to a certain extent. Like they know that their excuses, that their arguments to not be vegan, they know that they're bullshit and they don't fully believe in them. Veganism means applying the golden rule to everyone, extending it to non-human animals. Don't do to others what you wouldn't like if it was done to you. It's that simple. Does certain action cause harm? Am I justified in causing harm, or am I acting in self-defense? Or is just harm that I simply can avoid it and that's it? Just abstain from it. And this golden rule I'm talking about, nearly everyone already applies that rule to certain species of animals like dogs, cats, or other animals. They just happen to not contribute to their exploitation for their own benefit, like koalas, parrots, squirrels, or whatever. Isn't it curious how people are like, if I personally contribute to the exploitation of this animal species, then it's how it works. It's fine, it's normal. I can do whatever I want with these animals. That's what they were made for. And they'll do whatever it takes to argue in favor of the exploitation of the animal in question. But then they're like, oh, if I don't contribute to a certain form or practice of animal exploitation, but someone else does, like if someone else exploits an animal species that I don't, these people are evil, they're nasty. How could they be so cruel and inhumane? They're the worst people ever. Or alternatively, if my culture does it, it's okay. If it's another culture that's doing it, besides mine, it's evil. You can see, for example, people who eat meat and they criticize the Yulin Dog Festival in China, where they eat dogs and cats. This comes from a place of bias, of hypocrisy, and discrimination between species. And not only between species, it's rooted in racism, and these criticisms coming from non vegans perpetuate even more and more bigotry and fear mongering against Chinese people or Asian people in general. Even if you personally don't say things such as Chinese people are evil, if you're criticizing these things that stereotypically Chinese people do, if you're criticizing them as a non vegan, you're sending the message that it's worse when that culture does it, or even that the kind of animal abuse that exists in the West, it's no big deal, it's nothing. But when it's Chinese people, Asian people, it's a major atrocity, it's the worst. And they deserve a lot of outrage and attention. Oh, and yes, even if you're vegan, you have to be careful how you criticize these things because there's already a lot of rhetoric regarding eating dogs and cats to how Chinese or Asian people are seen. These people are victims of stigma, discrimination, violence, and hate crimes because of their reputation of eating the wrong animal species, like people saying, oh, Chinese people, they eat everything that walks, everything that breathes. They eat everything. They're so weird and nasty. And like even as a vegan, you don't have the right to be racist, to say that Chinese people are evil and or act it's worse than the other forms of animal exploitation like the Yulin Dog Festival and dog and cat consumption in China overall. It's not that huge of a thing like eating pigs and cows and chickens and fish than it is in other places in the world. Even in China, they eat other animals, the animals that most people eat. They eat more often than cats and dogs. So yeah, be careful with your rhetoric. Be careful how you criticize these things. But like the more people who go vegan, the more people who start saying, okay, where do you draw the line between which animals are okay to exploit and which animals, if people exploit them, it makes them evil, it makes them deserving of being hated, of being targets of violence. The more people who fight speciesism, people will start discriminating less and less other people, other cultures for these things. So yeah, that's another intersection between animal rights and human rights. Speciesism helps normalizing other forms of discrimination. Another point I'd like to make is it's not always discrimination between species necessarily. Sometimes it's just between practices. For example, people eat cows and drink milk from them. And in the process, it involves sexual exploitation of cows. I already mentioned this in the first video. But if someone sexually abused the cow for fun, for sexual pleasure, there would be an outrage even from the cow eaters and the milk drinkers. People say, it's not the same thing because they don't benefit from that form of abuse. It doesn't give them the cheese and the milkshakes they love so much. So they try to rationalize it and pretend it's not the same thing. They try to draw the line. Well, yeah, bestiality is only okay if they get milk in the process because there's a product, because it's not a waste, because and for fun. Yeah, for fun, it's not the same thing. Non-vegans often use garbage excuses to justify eating animals, like, oh, but plants feel pain, which is totally false. And I'm not even going to try to debunk it with some scientific articles, because these claims deserve to be taken with the same seriousness as the earth is flat or whatever bullshit. Here's the thing, if people consistently applied that excuse that plants feel pain, they'd apply it to humans too. Just imagine how ridiculous it'd be. A person tells you that they are in pain, they're feeling pain, or you've seen the news involving human suffering and death, and someone says, "Eh, whatever, plants feel pain too." So, plants aren't even sentient living beings. They don't have a brain or a central nervous system. But you certainly knew that already. Because absolutely no fucking one is concerned about that supposed plant suffering until veganism is mentioned. Another important thing to consider, which is especially relevant after having watched many of Chris' videos in this channel, is related to concepts like the law, traditions, social norms, and conformity. These ideas are brought up in this channel a lot. The law doesn't define what's the most factually, logically, or morally correct. It's a set of rules written by rich people in power and are used to punish people, whether or not these people are causing victims or causing any damage to anyone by breaking the law. And neither do social norms and what the majority does, mindlessly conforming to the status quo without questioning anything. These things don't make you a moral person and don't make the acts morally acceptable just because they're super normalized. This applies to veganism, of course, because first of all, many forms of animal use/abuse are perfectly legal and they are socially acceptable, as you can see from your daily life. So people get away with it with no consequence, without being called out without damaging their reputation. Deep down, they still have that mentality of, if I'm not punished for doing a bad thing, if the law says it's okay, then I'll keep doing it. And they defend these laws and arbitrary norms because they're convenient for them. It lets them get away with stuff. This happens a lot, even coming from people who are in the left, supposed anarchists, who already acknowledge that breaking laws isn't necessarily morally wrong, but the moment that animal rights are mentioned, their worldview collapses, and especially when the consequences of going vegan, the social consequences are nowhere as bad as the consequences of disobeying other social norms. When people are protesting in favor of animal rights or trying to rescue animals from farms or other places where they're being tortured, what will the police do? Many times they'll go there and prevent that from happening. They'll try to stop the activists. Why? Because a person in a position of power wrote in a piece of paper that animal torture and bestiality are perfectly fine as long there is a legally recognized industry like the meat industry where that stuff happens, and then the police is ordered to enforce these laws. If an activist is trying to rescue animals and to save them from a fate of cruelty, and the police is trying to stop them, who are the good guys and the bad guys in this scenario? If you acknowledge that disruptive forms of activism and protesting are legitimate when it comes to other issues, even when it comes to other animals, like activists rescuing dogs from the dog meat trade or monkeys from labs where they're being tortured, it should be easy to pick a side here, right? What I'm saying here is that as a leftist, as an anarchist who is familiar with the more radical side of politics, like police abolition, prison abolition, rebelling against the oppressor, you should be consistent when it comes to this. Also, the more privileged you are, the easier it is to abstain from politics, at least to downplay activism. Because why would you want the world to change, right? It's already fine. It's fine for you. So this also applies when you're privileged to be a human and to not be the one who is being farmed in the meat industry for industry or being tortured in animal testing labs. When you're not in their position, it's easy to be indifferent and to throw the victim under the bus. But what about compassion? What about anti-oppression? What about trying to be the most ethical person you can and trying to make this world the best you can? The very least you can do is being consistent on your views of these forms of activism, whether they're for human rights, environmental rights, and animal rights. Also, some more things I want to mention, especially when non-vegan leftists slash anti-vegan leftists online, they do these things a lot. I already talked about this in the previous video, by the way, but I didn't elaborate a lot. So let me dive a bit further here. One habit that people tend to have when trying to criticize veganism is resorting to tokenizing, which is bringing up a certain group of people or a certain issue to dismiss something and to try to argue against it when they're not genuinely concerned with the group or issue they're mentioning. One example of tokenizing you might be familiar with when J.K. Rowling and her fans, her supporters, claim to be doing all these bad things, in other words, transphobia. They say, like, it's for the greater good, it's to protect women, cis women, to protect gay men and autistic people. When not only it's not the case, but also saying that is offensive to women, gay men, and autistic people because these people have never agreed to be used as tokens for someone else's transphobic argument. They never agreed to side with J.K. Rowling and other transphobes. So, what am I trying to say with this? Is that when supposed leftists, one of their things that they do to totally shit on veganism, to totally crap on veganism, is that they decide that veganism is ableist because they interpret it as a diet. The topic of dieting is triggering for people with eating disorders, or because some people with very specific conditions might need to consume other animal products to survive. Or when they say that veganism is racist because some indigenous communities might rely on hunting to survive, or else they'll starve to death. Or because they saw one or two popular vegan activists making racially insensitive comments, like saying, black people shouldn't be complaining about racism because animals have it worse. What happens to animals is much worse. You shouldn't generalize a whole community, the vegan community, based on these people, especially when there are many black people or other people of color that are vegan and are prominent social justice activists like Angela Davis. And when they claim that veganism is classist because vegan food is expensive, they think they might only be referring to Beyond Burgers and that super expensive gourmet vegan cheese they saw around once. And they're not thinking about beans, rice, pasta, lentils, carrots, bread, and other vegetables in general, and other products that are already vegan by default. That or they say veganism is classist because of food deserts when they don't even fully understand them and they aren't bringing food deserts out of genuine concern with people living in these areas. If people learn to educate themselves on the bare minimum about the topic before talking about it, and they talk about veganism like they're the understandings of the topic, and they don't. If they knew, they know that veganism is as far as possible and practicable, that it's an ethical stance about doing the best you can to avoid the exploitation of animals and activities that exploit animals in your daily life. Not only that, they're putting veganism and other causes against each other, when not only these causes can cooperate, they should, in order to achieve total liberation, a fair world without discrimination. Veganism needs to cooperate with other movements. They are making up enemies where they don't exist. They try to paint veganism as an antagonist of indigenous, disabled, and poor people. When, guess what? There are indigenous, disabled, and poor people who are vegan. I've seen people online making claims such as poor people can't afford to be vegan, when these people have no clue how it is to live your life as a vegan, or sometimes they don't even know what it is to be poor, and they're erasing vegans who are poor, they're erasing vegans who are disabled and indigenous, and speaking over them like they understand better than them. And sometimes they stereotype all indigenous people as meat eaters, which again is a racist stereotype that causes harm, just like that stereotype about all Asian people eating dogs and cats. It's like mansplaining, just like when men try to explain women things that these women know even better than them. They go around and say, I'm neither indigenous nor vegan, but I know for sure that indigenous people can't be vegan. Yeah, trust me, indigenous vegans don't exist. It's their logic. We should be amplifying marginalized vegan voices, not erasing them. By erasing these groups of vegans, they're furthering this idea that only white, male, able bodied, economically privileged, cisgender vegan activists have the spotlight. That makes it easier for them to say, look at these vegans. These vegans are all white. They're all racist. Because they want to put vegans in a position where whenever we try to advocate for veganism, we're racist. We're the right wingers. All our arguments are dismissed, and they assume they won their little game. If you say you should go vegan, okay, you already lost because you're being racist. I've mentioned J.K. Rowling earlier, and I'll bring the TERFs again, the so-called gender criticals. These people who claim they are feminists, and they're just transphobes. They also play that game. They put you in a position where it's impossible to defend trans rights. Why? Because if you defend trans rights, you're automatically the asshole, since according to them, supporting trans rights means that you're a misogynist who hates feminism, even if you only hate that fake feminism that's based on hating trans people and blaming things on trans people when it's not their fault. And speaking of mansplaining, many non-vegans also love assuming that vegans don't know what the fuck we're talking about, that we've never heard the common arguments against veganism, so they'll make an anti-vegan argument thinking, I bet they never heard that one before. This one will surely make them rethink veganism. Just wait until this gotcha moment. Except that we've heard that fucking 5,000 times already. They think, vegans care so much about exploited animals. I bet they don't think about exploited farm workers and other exploited humans. Yeah, they only think about the animals. I mean, we probably think about these things way more than the non-vegans do. Firstly, because the non-vegans keep mentioning these things all the damn time whenever they're trying to argue against veganism. And secondly, since veganism is an ethical stance about minimizing harm and cruelty, we are more likely to be conscious about the environment and human rights. Surely some vegans are hypocritical and don't care about human rights. That's true. And many vegans criticize them all the time as well. But but when non-vegans call out the supposed hypocrisy of vegans, non-vegans are doing way less than us, and they don't bother changing their habits. They try to point to the hypocrisy of people who are actually trying to change stuff and to do their best. This kind of criticism doesn't seem to be genuine in good faith, right? Whenever I see vegan brands and organizations, they tend to take human rights and the environment just as seriously as veganism. Each time I check out vegan merchandise, such as clothing with no animal products, and without practices that exploited animals in the process, they almost always make it super clear that they try to source their materials as ethically as possible. They don't approve the use of sweatshops or other forms of modern slavery. And an organization that I like to bring up is Food Empowerment Project. I particularly like this organization because it has helped me dive deeper into these intersections when I was still getting started into veganism. And as you can see from their site, their goals are to bring justice to the workers, to the animals, to promote more ethical and conscious choices, and to try to end all forms of oppression, whether it's for humans and non-humans. You can take a look at their site. It has some information on what veganism is, how to go vegan, the kind of human rights violations that happen in farming and food industries. They have a list of which chocolate brands involve human exploitation and those that don't. They also care deeply about the environment and talk about colonization. You can click on that button on the top left corner, and there's a lot of stuff there. There are articles, there are news, resources, and on their social media, they talk about politics and social justice in general. They have many info on animal rights, on human rights. They talk about queer issues. They talk about abortion. And yeah, of course, they also talk about facts of the animal agriculture, the industries that use animals, how much damage they cause to the environment, and what violations happen there to the animal rights and human rights. Anyway, always keep in mind that veganism is still its own movement, and that we should never forget that animals deserve to be seen as more than just an afterthought. But yeah, every single political and social cause is interconnected somehow, and we should ultimately normalize veganism as one of the causes that is part of leftism. So, my point being that even if there weren't environmental benefits of going vegan, even if the meat industry didn't have these links to other issues, such as destroying indigenous land, it would still be our moral duty to be vegan. But oppression and therefore the fight for liberation, they don't exist in a vacuum, they don't exist separately, and we still have a long way to go when it comes to veganism in the left. We still need to consider food access, consider the fact that we live in a non-vegan world where animal use is super normalized and it's everywhere. and to break these common stereotypes and misconceptions regarding veganism and race, culture, socioeconomic status, disability, and so on. So, yeah, this is why, even if the core of the movement of veganism is about the animals, I believe that we should keep mentioning these things, especially when talking to a leftist audience. And talking about veganism in general, really, not only because veganism is already political, for many reasons I've mentioned in these two videos, but also if the people who are opposing veganism are politicizing it, vegans can't afford to not do the same as well. If you've listened until here, thank you very much for your attention. And before we go, as usual, if you want to support me financially, the coffee link is once again on the screen and the video description. Currently, I have no income of my own, and your donations can help me with my daily life and also afford to invest more of my time participating in these videos. Goodbye and see you next time.